Dmytro Kuleba.
Hello everyone, we are gathered here at Sciences Po to chat with ex-Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba. So we gathered with Sciences Po TV, the Sundial Press, as well as RCB.
Also had the help of the Young Europeans and Reims to ask some question to the Foreign Minister and have a little discussion, which you will discover on whatever platform you're watching us right now.
Thank you very much for watching.
You have to do it. We didn't have much contacts with Russian representatives. They were channeled to bilateral contact group and Normandy format. And since the large-scale invasion began, I had only one physical kind of contact with Foreign Minister Lavrov in Antalya, in Turkey, and my deputy was part of the Russian-Ukrainian talks in Belarus and Turkey in early 2022. And that's basically it. Today, the only channel of communication between Ukraine and Russia is our military intelligence, who talk mainly about exchange of prisoners of war, but also some other issues. Diplomats are not engaging with them. I can tell you honestly that in this job, you have to be prepared to talk to anyone. But how you're going to, what will be the format of the conversation, this is entirely up to you to decide for yourself. For example, when I was meeting with Lavrov in Antalya, I asked that we do not shake hands and we do not make a joint picture, and there is a long table between us. And the Turkish side kindly accepted my requests, so we were in one room, we negotiated, but we didn't really kind of touch each other or pretend that that everything was normal. But you have to understand that in this work, in this job, you have to be ready to talk to anyone, even to the devil. Otherwise, this job is not for you.
You mentioned that some African countries reject joint discussions between Ukraine and countries like France and England due to their colonial past. In this context, do you think Europe should adopt a unified diplomatic approach, or should they prioritize bilateral collaboration as Ukraine has done?
Given history and the fact that these nations have complaints on very specific European countries and not on Europe as a whole, of course, bilateral engagement seems to be giving you more space for maneuver and collaboration. But having said this, we should not undermine the very concept of common external action, common foreign policy of the European Union. So I would give as much room to bilateral engagement as possible without undermining basic principles of common EU policy.
What was the hardest choice you had to make within your diplomat career?
Hardest decision was to prohibit issuance of new documents to Ukrainian men abroad. That was very complicated because those men of mobilization age who are in Ukraine, they received documents like new passports or driving license in Ukraine. But those who left Ukraine, they received them in our embassies. And there was a big political pressure inside of Ukraine on the government. Why are you serving the men who fled military service? And this was the most difficult question to handle because you had to take side. Diplomacy is usually, being nice to everyone, trying to be nice to everyone. But wartime diplomacy is different, and you have to take sides all the time. Wartime diplomacy does not tolerate half decisions. So after weighing all arguments, I took the side of Ukrainian men inside of Ukraine and follow the instruction which I was given to put issuance of these documents on hold. It was a matter of justice. It was not an issue of law, it was an issue of justice. And sometimes just is not legal or legal is not just. Sometimes it's both just and legal, but we found the way to do it in a legal way without violating the law. But it was a moral choice. Who are you with? And this is why males older than 25 and their families who live abroad largely, this is the only social group that doesn't like me.
Switching the topic of the conversation, as Jeunes Européens, we're obviously very interested in promoting European integration and the enlargement of the European Union. And obviously, as the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, you were involved in the candidacy talks and the process regarding the EU membership of Ukraine. How do you envision the continuation of this process?
The European Union does not expand and does not include Ukraine, Moldova and Western Balkans. I touched upon this issue briefly in during my lecture, but there is, so first what must happen, we must finalize the accession talks, but there is another process that has to be concluded, so-called reform of the European Union, because I can hardly imagine that Ukraine will and both Western Balkans will become and Moldova will become members of the EU without EU first reforming some of its procedures. So my concern is that the issue of the reform of the EU reform may take more place than of Ukraine reform. Otherwise, I believe political decision has been made that Ukraine will be, made in Europe, that Ukraine will be a member of the EU. It's a matter of time, and there is many more hurdles ahead. There will be real fights between Ukraine and Poland on economic issues, between Ukraine and Hungary, and the road is not easy. It's bumpy, but what is fundamentally important is that both sides have the same vision of the destination point.
Despite the political commitment that has been made on part of the European Union about enlargement and the membership of Ukraine and Moldova, how do you think we can overcome the increasing rhetoric and idea that's especially common in Western European countries that the enlargements of 2004, 2007, 2014 were mistakes, and that the Union was quote-unquote better when it was a smaller, mainly Western and Central European Union with a different ethos?
Joke will come true, The Union, every good empire has to split into Western and Eastern. It's a civilizational issue. First, those who believe that enlargement was a mistake, unfortunately, will continue to believe, even if you present them with undeniable facts and figures that will prove they're wrong. Because they base their opinion not on data, not on facts, but on attitude towards the newcomers. This is it. So it doesn't make sense, in my view, trying to make them change their minds. What is fundamentally important is to do what you believe is right and invest all of yourselves in making it happen. People complain about everything, everywhere. This is in human nature. The only difference between humans 100 years ago and now is that today everyone has a voice on social media. In the old good days, they were complaining to each other on the world in their own kitchens, and then it got visible because everyone got a platform to express himself. You cannot change their mind, but do what you believe is right. History will judge who is going to prevail, you or them.
I guess a conclusion of this line of three questions, you talked about how the European Union before, concurrently to the enlargement process, should also reform itself. What do you think is necessary in terms of reform, and what role do you think Ukraine in particular can play as, for instance, a future member of the Council of the EU, as a major stakeholder that has a vote in these and a voice in these processes?
Ukraine should keep pushing on Europe. Europe finds itself at its best when it finds itself in times of trouble. The higher the trouble, the bigger the trouble is, the more efficient Europe behaves. So Ukraine took European Union out of enlargement coma. 3 years ago, speaking about EU enlargement was madness. Today it's a normality again. It's a new normal. And Ukraine did it. Ukraine gave a chance not only to itself, but also to Western Balkans, who were taken out of the limbo to Moldova, and ultimately for the European Union itself. Because I'm saying this not as a Ukrainian, but just as probably someone who has experience. If you do not expand, put yourself on a trajectory of slow death. Europe cannot stand still, begins to lose. Always expand the horizon, because this movement is the driving force. The moment Europe stands still, by 2022, all EU policy, foreign policy, was essentially take our money and don't bother us. Policy could only lead to eventual collapse. And after 2022, Europe really woke up. It became very conventional to criticize and name and shame Europe. Europe has amazed me, for example, in 2020, a couple of times in 2023. So in principle, it is very strong, it's capable. You see, this wealth, this prosperity does not come from inside of Europe as much as other people want to believe that it's better to live without the world around us. So if you begin losing the world, first you will lose prosperity and then you will lose security. This is why Europe needs active foreign policy. This is Europe needs to be a player.
I would like to know, since the start of the war, we've heard to talk about Ukrainian culture. People have started to realize and understand that there is a Ukrainian language. Most people didn't know it. We've also talked about Nikolai Gogol, that he was Ukrainian, and that Ukrainians, not only Ukrainians, but also Europeans, have started to understand that Ukrainians need to reappropriate themselves the Ukrainian past. I wondered if the cultural aspect was part of your work as Foreign Minister during the last 2 years, 3 years of war. You can be pretty honest.
Of course, culture is everything. It's all about culture. And culture is fundamentally important for diplomacy. If you look at Putin, for example, he is answering the same question as the main character of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment novel, who asks himself, am I a weak animal, or am I a trembling animal, or do I have a right to kill? That's exactly what Putin asked himself. Do I have a right to kill? Do I have the right to invade? Do I have the right to destroy? So Putin, everything Putin does is rooted in Russian culture. I'm fully aware that Russian ballet is deeply appreciated in France and is seen as the beautiful part of Russian culture. It is, but Dostoevsky is kind of a depressive chauvinist, right? And every intellectual family has his book on their bookshelves, and I'm sure that you have him in your library. If you want to understand Putin, read Dostoevsky. That's more or less it. The only difference is that in the end, Dostoevsky gives a glimpse of hope when his bad characters kind of seek redemption, and Putin doesn't. There is no good end. This is the only difference between Putin and Dostoevsky. Culturally, Ukraine achieved a lot during the war because we observe a renaissance of Ukrainian culture. Ukrainian identity became more strong. I wish we had spent 2 more years achieving the same goal without the war than we did within 2 years. That's the problem. But will culture continue to be an important part of diplomacy? Of course it will. In January at CNSPO, I met with a group of Yale professors who like Ukraine, who work on Ukraine and who are like pro-Ukrainian. And one of them said, we would like to offer you lunch. Unfortunately, we don't have borscht, the famous Ukrainian and Russian dish. That's it. Even it's Ukrainian dish. Even UNESCO recognizes it as a Ukrainian dish. But even people who cannot be accused of being foreign to Ukraine, they're still lost in this cultural deed. There is a lot of work to be done.
I'd like to know, how do you think that non-traditional actors like the tech billionaires through social media will affect nowadays diplomacy?
The one who controls people's access to information has leverage. If you open X, the first thing I will see will be posts by Elon Musk and by Alex Jones and all the what Americans call conservative wing. I'm not following them, but Elon Musk tuned the algorithm in a way that whether I follow them or not, these are the first messages that I'm going to see. So these people will run the world. They will. And the arrival of President Trump to power, the arrival of the incredible surge of Alternative für Deutschland in Germany, it's all products of Facebook. This is the result of the process that started like 20 years ago when we all started signing up Facebook, then we went to Instagram, then came the messengers. Do not get surprised that people do not see facts anymore, do not live in the world of facts. I know many very nice intellectuals, very good people who cry asking themselves, how can people believe in lies? They can, because they do not see it as a lie. And you show them 100 pieces of evidence that it's a lie, and they will still believe that you conceal something from them. The task is not in re-educating these people, because they are human beings and they have plenty of evidence on internet that Earth is flat, Ukrainians are Nazis, that Putin is savior of the world. You will never be able to prove them of anything. The question is, how do we learn to live and prevail in this environment? How do we make sure that our narrative becomes captures attention of more people. Facts are boring. Lies are thrilling. People love lies. This is it. Biggest challenge. We still cannot adapt this new reality. We struggle to adapt. But people like you will believe in, and the roles you will be playing in your societies will be consequential for the future. I'm not exaggerating. It's not a compliment. Recognition.
We talked about Europe need to unite. Do you think that the European Union, or maybe more broadly the Europe, has a need for having those type of networks? Because we know TikTok from China, we have Facebook and Twitter for the United States. And would it be a good idea, European Union, to have those type of things to protect themselves?
Yes, but it's too late. But Europe seems to have learned the lesson, because now you have the French product, Le Mistral, as AI chat, which is competitive with OpenAI and DeepSeek. So Europe missed the opportunity to have its own social network, and I don't think it will be able to build one, because it didn't consider networks as a source of potential threat. AI from the beginning was considered as an issue of economic competitiveness, instrument that can be used as a threat, as a leverage. So in this field, Europe quickly realized that it has to act on its own, and now everyone is so proud about Le Mistral. I downloaded it, and I'm trying to use it from time to time as well, but with social media it's gone. But in principle, we are moving towards more autonomous information spaces, and the biggest issue, the biggest challenge will be to reconcile it with the freedom of speech. Conventional principles of the freedom of speech, they have been challenged and used against the defenders of the freedom of speech. I give you one example, always struck European journalists 10 years ago. Famous standard means a journalistic standard implies that you have to provide at least two opinions. Consumer of this information make a judgment. Of course, as a journalist, you have a room to navigate. Well, Ukraine says this, Russia says this. I double-checked, and I believe Ukraine is right. And what Russia says is not based on facts. The problem is that what Russia thinks makes it to the audience, and you reinforce propaganda. And trust me, there will always be a certain part of your audience who will prefer lie to truth. So we have to seriously reassess the concept of how are we going to defend freedom of speech by sometimes limiting it, because absolute freedom of speech takes us to the world of Elon Musk.
You mentioned in an article for Foundation Robert Schuman that Ukraine as an EU member could strengthen the union's defense capabilities and add values to the common market. Which Ukrainian economic sectors could contribute the most?
Agriculture, because this is where we will be fighting each other. I actually think that the only real problem that will be hard to resolve is integration of Ukraine's agricultural sector into the EU. In the way common agricultural policy exists today in the EU, it's incompatible with the arrival of Ukraine, because Ukraine will dominate everyone and France will be the first one to oppose it. So it needs to change. Either we will not integrate into it, or some principles of common agricultural EU policy have to change. I think production base would be very appealing to by producing something in China. Ukraine can do much more. Second, Ukraine is a big market, and you can, free flow of goods. Of course, I am tempted to mention IT, digitalization. We will definitely be a player there, and we will make you stronger, but we will have to adapt to the world of LLMs, because we were famous for the army of coders, and these coders, many of them will be gone because AI will code instead. But coders, in principle, as profession, will remain, and Ukraine will be very, very important player. And finally, for a couple of decades to come, Ukraine will be a driving force in defense industries. And with Ukraine is the only chance of Europe to build strong defense capabilities. I'm not speaking about army, I'm speaking about weapons, because the fastest way to develop efficient weapons is to test them with Ukrainian army. The most advanced technologies are possessed by Ukrainian army. The most experienced soldiers in the use of weapons is Ukrainian army. So defense industry will become an important part of EU economy very soon, because governments will begin to invest in it and support producers, and Ukraine is indispensable to making this sector of economy efficient.
Spoke a lot about the relationship with the European Union, obviously, but I'd like to focus on the other major actor, which is the US, especially since you mentioned the current political state with the AfD with Donald Trump. When Donald Trump speaks of the situation in Ukraine, he often speaks of peace no matter what we have to give up for it. So, for example, submission to Russia in order to have peace in Ukraine. Do you think that independence takes the precedence over peace, and that it's more important to ensure that Ukraine can remain independent and free of Russian rule, in quotes? Or do you think that peace should be the main focus? How do you kind of wage between the two? How do you weight which one is more important as a diplomat?
I would frame it even easier. What is the choice between life and death? When you speak about peace and independence, these are very abstract concepts. Life and death are very physical. What would you choose, life or death? Submission of Ukraine to Putin means death of both Ukraine and Ukrainians. He will have no mercy. He will not forgive. He will finish the job of his multiple predecessors. Every time we were losing a war to the Russians, it ended up in a bloodshed. Children killed, adults, old, women, men, everyone. He will not forgive. It's not an abstract conversation. It's an issue. I will most likely be killed, for example, if Russia comes to Kiev. FSB will arrest me and throw me to prison, and I will die there. So what do I choose? Thank you, guys. You're brilliant.